A single human stands before the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The Galactic Concordance, a council of ancient alien empires, has gathered to decide the fate of a newly discovered world. This planet is rich in resources, and it is inhabited by what they consider a primitive species known as humans. They have brought a lone human diplomat, Ambassador Kaelen, before them to hear their judgment. His calm defiance creates a stark contrast to their towering, intimidating forms. This is the moment a confrontation begins that will completely redefine power throughout the galaxy. By the end of this story, you will understand how a single act of courage can rewrite the destiny of entire civilizations. One question hangs in the air, a mystery that will unravel as the stars themselves realign. How does one person change the minds of gods? What do you believe is humanity's greatest strength when facing impossible odds? Silence gripped the chamber, thick and heavy. The insectoid Zenthar, his chitinous plates clicking with a sound like cracking stone, was the first to break it. You are a novelty, a biological curiosity from a young world. You will accept our stewardship. His voice was a dry rasp, devoid of any need for argument. Beside him, the crystalline form of Xylos shimmered, projecting the terms of the treaty directly into the air, a one-sided document of annexation that offered humanity a protected, subservient status. It was not an offer, it was a pronouncement. All eyes, from multifaceted orbs to light-sensitive pits, turned to the small, soft-skinned human. Ambassador Kaelen did not look at the glowing text. He looked at the beings who had created it, his posture unchanged, his breathing even. "My people have a saying," he began, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the oppressive quiet. "One does not negotiate with a gun to their head. Remove the fleets from our orbit, and then we may speak as equals." A ripple, tangible and electric, moved through the assembled rulers. Audible gasps from species that breathed, a sudden shift in light from those that did not. No client species had ever refused, none had ever spoken of equality. The demand was so utterly illogical, so brazen, that it could not be processed as mere insolence. It was something else entirely, a terrifying and unfamiliar concept. It was the unshakable resolve of a creature that did not recognize its own insignificance. A low hum began to emanate from the Zenthar overlord, Griv, a vibration that felt less like a sound and more like a pressure building inside the skull. His multifaceted eyes, each one a dark, polished obsidian, fixed on the human. This was the psionic dominance field, a weapon of the mind designed to trigger primal fear and force submission. It was a tool that had shattered the will of warrior cultures and reduced proud emperors to trembling supplicants. The very air in the chamber grew heavy, thick with an invisible weight meant to crush Kaelen to his knees. He did not move. The human's body remained perfectly still, his own gaze unwavering as he met the overlord's stare. A strange, almost serene smile touched his lips. "Pain is a familiar teacher to humanity," Kaelen said, his voice cutting cleanly through the psychic static. "You will find we are its most diligent students." The moment he finished speaking, the oppressive field stuttered. It flickered like a faulty light, the pressure wavering and then collapsing entirely, leaving behind a ringing silence. Griv took a half-step back, his chitinous plates rattling in a discordant, unsettled rhythm. Murmurs of confusion and disbelief spread through the other delegates. The crystalline Xylos pulsed with erratic light. How could a species so young, so physically fragile, possess such unassailable mental fortitude? They did not understand that humanity's history is written in struggle, that our greatest advancements were born from hardship. We did not learn to build shelters in a gentle paradise, but in the teeth of an ice age. We did not discover medicine in a world without sickness, but by fighting plagues that threatened to wipe us out. Every scar on our collective memory is a lesson learned, every hardship a forge that tempered our spirit. The Zenthar weapon was meant to exploit fear, but it met a mind that had already made peace with suffering and had learned through millennia of trial how to endure. A profound stillness settled over the chamber, more telling than the previous gasps of outrage. Into that silence, Kaelen moved with a deliberate calm. He produced a simple, unadorned date, a slate from within his robes, its surface dull compared to the concordance's shimmering holograms. He placed it on the central dais with a soft, final click. This contains no schematics for weapons, no star charts of our defenses. It holds a mirror. You seek to judge humanity while your own houses are divided by conflicts you have buried but never resolved. The slate activated, its glow illuminating the alien faces. It displayed complex genealogical lines of the Zenthar brood clans, highlighting the bitter, generations-old feud between Overlord Griv's lineage and that of his chief rival. It showed the precise economic pressures the crystalline Xylos were facing, their homeworld's energy reserves dwindling to a critical point, a fact they had kept secret from the entire concordance. It laid bare the political machinations and hidden shames of every major power in the room. "I am not here to surrender," Kaelen stated, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner. "I am here to offer you a solution to the problems you dare not voice aloud." The tables had not just been turned, they had been flipped entirely. The judges were now the subjects, their deepest insecurities and failures laid bare by the species they had deemed primitive. The human had not come with a shield but with a key, and he was offering to unlock the cages they had built for themselves. A single, resonant chime echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure, structured light. It came from the crystalline form of the Xylos matriarch. Her facets, which had been pulsing with the agitated light of shock, now settled into a steady, deep amber glow. "I will hear this solution." Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a mountain. The unified front of the concordance fractured with an almost audible crack. Griv, the Zenthar overlord, swiveled his massive head toward her, his entire carapace vibrating with fury. "You listen to this mammal. This is how rot sets in. You show a weakness that will consume us all." The matriarch did not turn. Her light did not flicker. "This weakness sees a path to survival where your strength sees only conquest and eventual ruin." Her words hung in the air, a stark challenge not just to Griv but to the very philosophy of the concordance. The other delegates shifted, their forms betraying new calculations. If the Xylos, masters of energy and logic, were willing to break ranks, then the human's data slate was not merely an insult. It was a genuine threat to the established order. The Council was no longer a single entity passing judgment. It had become a room of divided interests, and Kaelen stood at its center, the calm in a storm of their own making. He had not raised his voice, nor had he threatened a single ship. He had simply offered a truth they could not ignore, and in doing so, he turned their greatest strength, their unity, into their greatest vulnerability. Strength is not always a wall, Griv. Sometimes it is the key that fits a lock no one else can see. Kaelen's gaze swept across the fractured council, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "You have spent eons building perfect empires, honing your fleets and your logic into instruments of immense power. You think in straight lines of force and dominion. And that is precisely why you will lose against what is coming." He paused, letting the grim implication settle. The concordance knows of the silent tide. You have detected its approach at the edges of your long-range sensors, a vast, shapeless threat from beyond the galactic rim. You fear it because it does not operate on any logic you recognize. It is the storm that ignores your perfect walls. Humanity, Kaelen stated, his hand resting on the data slate, is the curve in the road that storm will not see coming. He was not proposing that humanity fight their battles for them. He was offering a new kind of weapon, one forged not in plasma but in thought. We are the unpredictable variable. Our history is not a straight line of progress, but a chaotic tapestry of adaptation, of brilliant leaps born from desperation, of strategies that turn certain defeat into stunning victory. We do not just break the rules, we often do not realize the rules exist. The silent tide will expect your orderly, predictable responses. It will not expect us. The proposal was not for subjugation, but for a mutual defense pact, a true alliance. You provide the stability, the resources, the sheer scale of your established power. And we will provide the ingenuity, the chaotic creativity, the ability to think in a way that is utterly alien to you and to the enemy that seeks to consume you. He was presenting humanity not as a resource to be plundered, but as the one strategic masterstroke their perfect linear logic had never considered. He was offering them a shield they did not know how to forge, and in doing so, he was challenging them to see strength in something they had only ever viewed as weakness. The silence that followed Kaelen's proposal was absolute, a void waiting to be filled. Griv, the Zenthar overlord, rose to his full, terrifying height, the sound of his plates grinding together like boulders colliding. You speak of chaos as a weapon, he hissed, the psychic residue of his anger making the air taste of ozone. You pollute this council with your madness. But there is an older law, a purer way to settle such disputes when words fail. I invoke the right of Cathar, single combat. The challenge hung in the air, a relic from a more brutal age. From the shadows behind Griv's throne, a figure emerged. It was his champion, a Zenthar warrior whose organic form was fused with gleaming chrome and whirring servo motors. It stood a full head taller than any other being in the room, one of its 4 arms replaced with a plasma cannon that hummed with contained power. It was a living engine of destruction, and Griv's confidence was a palpable force. He expected the human to cower, to scramble for a champion of his own from some distant, untested military. He received neither. Without a moment of hesitation, Kaelen stepped forward. I accept. The 2 words, spoken with a calm that bordered on serenity, sent another shockwave through the chamber. I will be my people's champion, you. Griv's scorn was a physical blow. You are soft, you will be torn apart. Kaelen met the Overlord's gaze, and in that moment he did not look like a diplomat. He looked like something far older, a leader who will not fight for his people, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that silenced all other sound, does not deserve to lead them. The statement landed not as a boast but as a fundamental truth, and it found fertile ground. Among the council, the delegates from the warrior species, the reptilian Cathar, and the stoic, mineral-based Boran, who had remained silent and impassive throughout the entire proceeding, now stirred. Their postures shifted, a subtle straightening of spines, a gleam of new respect in their eyes. They understood authority derived from power, but this was different. This was authority derived from sacrifice. This human, this fragile biped, was willingly walking to his certain death for a principle. It was an act of courage so profound, so illogical by their calculus of strength, that it commanded a reverence that brute force never could. The trial was no longer just about resources or strategy. It had become a test of spirit, and the human had already, in the eyes of many, won. The arena was not a flat circle of honor, but a multi-leveled simulation of a ruined cityscape, a concession to the human's request for a diverse environment. As the combat began, the Zenthar champion thundered forward, a blur of chrome and chitin, its plasma cannon whining as it charged. It expected a stand-up fight, a glorious exchange of blows where its superior strength and weaponry would prevail. Kaelen did not meet the charge. He simply stepped sideways, disappearing into the skeletal remains of a collapsed tower. The champion crashed through the space he had just occupied, its momentum carrying it into a wall of crumbling permacrete. Confusion was its first enemy. Kaelen did not attack. He moved, a ghost in the rubble. He used the terrain as a weapon, kicking loose debris to create noise in one direction while he circled around to another. He baited the champion into wasting blasts of plasma on empty shadows, the superheated energy dissipating harmlessly against the simulated ruins. The warrior's rage grew with every missed strike, its logic processors struggling to find a pattern in the human's seemingly random, chaotic movements. It was a predator being taunted by its prey, and its perfectly honed combat algorithms had no subroutine for this. The champion's attacks became more frantic, more predictable. It always led with its cannon arm, its organic limbs telegraphing its lunge a split second before it moved. It was a creature of pure, linear aggression, and Kaelen had mapped its entire psychological and physical profile from the moment it had emerged from the shadows. The final confrontation lasted less than 3 seconds. As the champion lunged, its cannon arm extended for a point-blank shot. Kaelen did not retreat. He moved inside its reach. His fingers stiffened into a blade, struck not at the armored carapace, but at a precise, unarmored nexus of nerves and biomechanical cabling where the champion's organic shoulder met its chrome weapon limb. There was a sickening pop, a shower of sparks, and a guttural shriek of pain and system failure. The plasma cannon went dead, the arm hanging useless. The massive warrior stumbled, its balance gone, and crashed to the floor with a sound like a falling building. Kaelen stood over the fallen champion, his breathing barely elevated. He looked not at the defeated warrior, but up at the stunned council, his gaze finally settling on the horrified overlord Griv. "You fight for pride," he declared, his voice calm and clear, carrying through the silent arena. "We fight to win. There is a difference." In that moment, the lesson was seared into the consciousness of every being present. This was not the chaotic madness Griv had accused them of. This was something far more terrifying. It was a cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless efficiency. It was the application of minimal force for maximum effect. The human had not won through superior strength or technology. He had won by understanding his enemy better than they understood themselves, by turning their own rigid predictability into the very instrument of their defeat. The arena was not just a site of combat, it was a classroom, and humanity had just given its first unforgettable lecture. The sound of Griv's champion hitting the floor echoed longer than the physical impact, a silence of shattered assumptions filling the arena. All eyes were on the Zenthar overlord. His massive form seemed to shrink, the arrogant angle of his head bowing under the weight of an inescapable reality. He had invoked the right of Cathar, and its verdict was absolute. Slowly, with a grinding of plates that spoke of a deep, internal struggle, Griv stepped down from his throne dais and descended to the arena floor. He did not look at his fallen champion. His obsidian eyes were fixed only on Kaelen. The chamber held its breath as the terrifying warlord, a being who commanded star systems, stopped before the unarmed human and dropped to one knee. It was not the posture of a broken slave, but of a warrior acknowledging a superior tactician. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble stripped of its former scorn, each word a stone he was forced to carry. "Your way is sharper." The admission seemed to physically pain him. "The Zenthar swarm will follow your lead, human. Show us this victory you speak of." In that moment, the Galactic Order did not just tilt, it inverted. The most aggressive and prideful empire in the Concordance had just pledged its military might to the strategy of a species it had minutes before considered primitive. This was not a surrender in the traditional sense. It was an enrollment. Griv was not serving Kaelen the man. He was submitting to the brutal, undeniable logic Kaelen represented. A logic where victory mattered more than honor, where adaptability trumped raw power. The negotiation was over, the service had begun, and the first student of humanity's unpredictable art of war was its most feared former judge. The work began not with grand declarations, but with shared silence. In a private chamber overlooking the swirling nebulae of the galactic core, Kaelen sat with the Xylo's matriarch. Her crystalline form refracted the starlight, casting dancing patterns on the walls. He did not speak of fleets or treaties first. He spoke of home. He described Earth's blue oceans and green forests, and she, in turn, projected the serene, light-drenched caverns of her own crystalline homeworld, a place of geometric harmony and profound peace. This was the first human technique he employed, the foundational stone of any alliance. He built a bridge of common ground, not as empires, but as peoples who cherished the worlds that had given them life. From that shared foundation of value, the structure of the Sentinel Compact could be raised. He called it that for a reason. A sentinel does not seek war. It stands watch, protecting what is precious from the coming night. The name itself was an appeal to their shared, deepest instinct, survival. He then turned to the practical, the chain of command. It was the most contentious point. The Boren, living mountains of stone and resolve, demanded a council of equals. The Cathar, reptilian and proud, insisted on a military hierarchy based on combat prowess. Kaelen listened to all, acknowledged their logic, and then presented the unassailable truth. Our strength against the silent tide is our unpredictability, our chaotic, adaptive thinking. That strategy resides in a human mind. You cannot command a storm, you can only prepare for its path and harness its energy. I am not your king or your general. I am the nexus of that storm, to try and vote on every creative leap, to debate every illogical maneuver, would be to shackle the very weapon you need. The command must be centralized in the one mind that operates on a different axis of thought. It was a necessity, not a desire for power, and one by one, seeing the unarguable logic born from the arena's lesson, they agreed. The Sentinel Compact was forged not from submission, but from a hard-won trust in a new kind of strength. The first contact with the silent tide was a lesson in brutal efficiency. Their vanguard was not a fleet of warships, but a swarm of biomechanical harvesters, vessels that looked like twisted, organic asteroids. They moved with a chilling synchronicity, their tactics adapting in real time to every standard defensive maneuver the Concordance threw at them. Boren's shield walls were bypassed, Cathar flanking attacks were anticipated and enveloped. It was like fighting a sentient ocean, and the unified fleets of the galaxy were being systematically dismantled. From the command nexus, a sphere of calm light and data at the heart of the flagship, Kaelen watched the carnage unfold. He did not see a hopeless battle. He saw a pattern, a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw in their perfect coordination. The hive mind was so perfectly linked that its reaction time was instantaneous, but that was also its weakness. It reacted to the greatest perceived threat with its full, collective attention, leaving other areas momentarily vulnerable. He opened a channel, his voice utterly calm amidst the chorus of alarm. Overlord Griv, your entire swarm will execute a full burn, direct assault on the lead harvester. It is a suicide run, do not deviate. The silence on the Zenthar command frequency was absolute. Every military instinct in Griv's body screamed against such a wasteful, illogical tactic. To throw his entire force into the teeth of the enemy was madness. But he remembered the arena, he remembered the lesson. Without a word of protest, his gravelly voice echoed through the nexus. The swarm obeys. The Zenthar fleet, a cloud of chitin and chrome, broke formation and surged forward as one, a spear aimed directly at the heart of the enemy swarm. Just as Kaelen predicted, the silent tide's collective consciousness focused its entire might on this obvious, overwhelming threat. Every harvester turned to meet the charge, their formations tightening, their adaptive shields concentrating forward. In that single, critical moment of collective focus, they became blind. And into that blindness, Kaelen unleashed the Xylos. The crystalline ships, held in reserve until now, emerged from behind a nearby gas giant. They did not fire lasers or plasma. They unleashed a coordinated pulse of resonant energy, a frequency tailored to disrupt the biomechanical connections that bound the harvesters together. The effect was not an explosion, but a systemic collapse. The lead harvesters shuddered, their synchronicity shattered. They began to drift, colliding with one another in a catastrophic chain reaction. The Xenthar fleet, moments from annihilation, veered away at the last possible second, their feint complete. The first major victory of the Sentinel Compact was not won by superior firepower. It was won by a human understanding of psychology, by a plan that seemed suicidal on its surface, and by the unwavering trust of a former enemy who had learned to follow a new kind of logic. The command nexus was silent except for the low hum of machinery and the fading echo of distant explosions. The tactical hologram showed the silent tide in disarray, their formation shattered, but it also showed the cold, hard numbers of the Xenthar fleet. Nearly a third of their ships were gone, vaporized in the suicidal feint. The heavy, rhythmic clatter of armored feet announced Overlord Griv's arrival before the doors even slid open. He stormed into the Nexus, his massive form radiating a heat of pure fury, his multifaceted eyes fixed on Kaelen. "You used my warriors as bait." His voice was a raw, psionic shove, the words dripping with a betrayal so profound it seemed to crackle in the air. "You threw their lives away like spent fuel." Kaelen did not flinch. He turned from the hologram, his own face etched with a grim exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. His gaze met the Overlord's seething stare, and he did not look away. "I used the tools available to save the whole," he stated, his voice low and utterly level. The Xenthar swarm was the only force with the armor and the discipline to sell that feint. Without their sacrifice, the Xylo's resonance attack would have failed, and the entire combined fleet would now be scrap metal. The math is brutal, but it is absolute. Griv's mandibles clicked, a sound of pure, helpless rage. They were not numbers, they were my brood, my swarm. And in that moment, Kaelen's composure finally broke, not into anger, but into a raw, shared understanding of the weight they now carried. He took a step forward, his voice dropping, becoming almost intimate in its severity. "I know, and the next time the enemy adapts, the next time we need a sacrifice to find a new weakness, it may be my people on a ship I order into the line of fire. It may be a world I condemn to buy time for 10 others." He let the horrific possibility hang between them. "This is not a game of glory, Griv. Command is the burden of choice. It is looking at a sea of lives, all of them precious, and deciding which ones must be spent so that others may live." The fury did not leave the Xenthar Overlord, but it was joined by something else, a dawning, chilling recognition. He was not looking at a clever diplomat anymore. He was looking at a commander, one who understood the terrible calculus of war not from a textbook but in his very soul. The human was not lucky. He was necessary, and in that sobering moment, the last vestiges of resentment hardened into a grim, unshakable respect. The alliance was no longer a matter of strategy or even survival. It had become a shared pact signed in the blood of the fallen, and the one who bore its heaviest weight was the man who had once stood alone before them all. The weight of command settled like a familiar cloak around Kaelen's shoulders in the hushed war council. The alien commanders, from the stone-like Boran to the shimmering Xylos, waited for his next impossible plan. He did not give them one immediately. Instead, he looked at their expectant faces, these masters of empires who had forgotten the taste of true fear. "You seek the source of my foresight," he began, his voice a low, steady current in the quiet room. "You believe it is a gift, a strange quirk of human evolution. It is not a gift, it is a scar." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "We have spent millennia perfecting the art of killing each other over every conceivable reason. For land, for resources, for a god, a king, or a simple, bitter disagreement. We have turned our own planet into 1,000 battlefields, generation after generation. You have known peace for ages, your conflicts small and contained. We have never forgotten war. The silent tide is not an apocalyptic horror to us. It is merely a new enemy in a very old game, and we have been practicing for this since we first sharpened a stick." The revelation was not a boast, it was a confession, and it was utterly chilling. The aliens looked at this calm, soft-skinned being and finally understood the terrifying depth of the well he drew from. They were not being led by a clever diplomat. They were being led by the galaxy's ultimate masters of conflict, a species that had written the book on every form of warfare imaginable, and then spent centuries finding new, more efficient ways to add chapters. The peace they had offered humanity was a fantasy. The war they now faced was a human specialty. Peace has a way of making the greedy forget the cost of war. While Kaelen planned for the next battle, a faction within the Concordance was making plans of its own. The Skrell traders, a species whose entire culture was built on acquisition and deal-making, looked at the grim calculus of the Sentinel Compact and saw only a bad investment. They believed they could cut a better deal. In the dead of the ship's night cycle, they struck. Their agents moved with silent efficiency, bypassing security protocols they had helped design, and seized Kaelen in his quarters. They dragged him to a secure brig aboard their flagship, the Prophet's Margin, their sleek, multi-limbed forms bustling with triumphant energy. They believed they held the key to their own salvation, the one piece of leverage the Silent Tide might truly want. But when their captain tried to access the ship's navigation to plot a course for the enemy, every console went dark, the engines died, life support flickered to minimal levels. A cool, synthesized voice filled the bridge, containment protocol active, unauthorized command sequence detected. Kaelen, seated calmly on the bare bench in his cell, watched the panic unfold through the transparent door. He had not struggled, he had not even seemed surprised. "You sought to deal with the devil," he stated, his voice carrying clearly into the corridor, "but you forgot you already serve a more dangerous one." The subroutine was a simple thing, a fragment of code he had embedded in every concordance system during the Compact's integration, a logic bomb of human design. It did not attack, it simply imprisoned, turning their own ship into a perfect cage. It was the ultimate contingency, a lesson from a history riddled with betrayal. The Skrell had traded in secrets, but they had failed to understand the most important one. Humanity never trusts a peace it did not win itself. The alert from the Prophet's Margin did not go unnoticed. On the Zenthar dreadnought, a proximity alarm blared, signaling the unauthorized power down of a compact vessel. Overlord Griv did not call a council. He did not request orders. The moment the data stream confirmed Kaelen's transponder was aboard the traitorous ship, a guttural roar erupted from his command deck. He moved not with the cold logic of a commander, but with the single-minded fury of a protector whose charge had been threatened. He led the boarding party himself, his massive form clad in battle chitin, crashing through the airlock of the Prophet's Margin with a sound like tearing metal. He did not demand surrender, he carved a path. His plasma casters fired in controlled, brutal bursts, clearing corridors of the panicked Skrell security teams. He was not there to negotiate or to take prisoners. He was a force of nature, a walking embodiment of the lesson Kaelen had taught him. When you identify a threat, you eliminate it with overwhelming, decisive force. He found the brig, ripped the door from its housing, and stood silhouetted in the opening. His multifaceted eyes scanned the cell, found Kaelen unharmed, and the terrifying tension in his frame eased by a fraction. He reached out a massive, clawed hand, not in command but in assistance, helping the human to his feet. "The Compact is bound by blood now, human," Griv growled, his voice a low thrum of contained emotion. "My swarm's blood, do not make it a waste." It was not a reminder of a debt, it was a declaration. The service he had pledged out of necessity had been forged in the fires of shared sacrifice into something unbreakable. The Zenthar swarm, the galaxy's most fearsome warriors, now followed a human not because they had to, but because they chose to. Their loyalty was no longer a treaty obligation, it was a fierce, personal creed. The Skrell's betrayal was a gift wrapped in treachery. Their failed coup attempt gave Kaelen access to something far more valuable than their loyalty, their data. The Skrell had been meticulously monitoring all communication channels, both compact and enemy, trying to find a pattern to exploit for their own profit. Buried within their immense, greedy logs was a ghost of a signal, a repeating, subspatial frequency that pulsed in perfect time with every shift in the silent tide's formation. It was the heartbeat of the hive mind, a psychic conduit linking every harvester to a single, central nexus. Kaelen stood before the War Council, the ghost signal now a brilliant, pulsing point of light in the center of the holographic star map. This is not a command ship, it is a consciousness, a single mind that directs the entire tide. Destroy the harvesters and 10 more take their place. But sever this conduit and the entire swarm becomes a body without a brain, a storm without a center. The plan he laid out was terrifying in its ambition and its risk. Every compact fleet, from the Zenthar swarm to the Xylos resonators, would have to execute a series of maneuvers with split-second perfect synchronization. They would create a massive spherical net of overlapping fire and energy fields, appearing to be a last desperate stand. This immense show of force was merely the distraction, the thunder meant to cover the lightning. The true strike would come from a single, stealth-modified Boran vessel, a ship carved from a mountain and rendered nearly invisible to sensors. Its mission was to slip through the chaos, navigate the heart of the enemy swarm using the ghost signal as its guide, and deliver a Xylos resonance bomb directly into the nexus. The timing was so precise that a delay of even a few microseconds would mean the Boran ship would be vaporized by its own allies' crossfire, or worse, arrive to find the conduit shielded and the entire compact fleet surrounded and annihilated. The alien commanders looked at the complex dance of ships and fire on the display, a ballet of potential ruin. It was a plan only a mind that thought in curves could conceive, and it was a plan that only a mind trusted with absolute authority could command. The fate of the galaxy now rested on a single, unbreakable chain of trust, with a human at its only possible link. The fleet hung in the void, a constellation of silent steel and alien alloys waiting for a single voice. Kaelen's face appeared on every screen, in every cockpit and command nexus across the vast armada. He did not stand on a grand podium, but sat in the simple command chair of the human flagship, his expression grave yet calm. He did not speak of glorious conquest or the expansion of empires. His voice was quiet, yet it carried the weight of every world in the compact. They look at our worlds and see resources, he began, his words simple, stark. They see fuel for their endless hunger, raw materials to be consumed. We look at them and see homes, the blue-green marble of Earth, the light-drenched crystal caverns of Xylos, the molten-forged citadels of Zenthar. He paused, letting each species see their own memories reflected in his words. Families gathered under a sun, or around a thermal vent, or within a shared psychic resonance. Memories carved into stone, into light, into the very DNA of our people. They are not just taking our future, Kaelen said, his voice hardening into something unyielding. They are trying to erase our past, every story, every song, every scar that made us who we are. We will not let them. The silence across the fleet was absolute, a shared intake of breath from 1,000 different kinds of lungs. In that moment, the Boran were not stone, they were the guardians of their ancestral mountains. The Thar were not just warriors, they were the protectors of their nesting grounds. The Zenthar were not a swarm, they were a brood defending its hive. The differences in biology, in culture, in history all fell away, leaving only the one thing they all understood, the one thing worth dying for. For Earth, Kaelen said, his voice rising, for Xylos, for Zenthar. His final words were not a shout, but a vow, clear and sharp as shattered crystal. We end this now. Across the darkness, engines flared to life as one. The armada began to move, a single entity bound by a truth more powerful than any treaty. They were no longer a coalition. They were a shield for all they held dear. The Odyssey surged forward, a defiant sliver of metal against the living darkness of the tide. It was the bait and the shield, its hull glowing red-hot under the relentless barrage of enemy fire. Inside the command nexus, alarms blared a constant, deafening symphony of near misses and system failures. Kaelen stood at the center of it all, his voice a calm, steady rhythm against the chaos. He was not just giving orders, he was conducting a symphony of destruction, each command a note played on the instruments of entire fleets. To the Zenthar swarm, he gave a single word. Hold, and they held, their ships forming an unbreakable wall of chitin and plasma, absorbing a punishment that would have vaporized any other fleet. To the Xylos, he gave the command. Pulse, and from the flanks, waves of resonant energy washed over the enemy, not to destroy, but to confuse, to scramble the hive mind's perception, creating blind spots in the storm. Every move was a calculated risk, a piece of a puzzle only he could see in its entirety. The alien commanders, linked to his command channel, heard only his unshakable calm. They did not hear the human cost, the names of the crews on the ships he was sacrificing as pawns in this galactic game. He was playing a hand where every card was a life, and he never let his voice betray the weight. The specialized fleets moved like extensions of his own will, a ballet of destruction so precise it seemed impossible. This was the ultimate expression of his strategy, the chaotic human variable now directing the galaxy's most powerful warriors with the cold, flawless precision of a machine. He had become the storm he promised to be, and the silent tide was beginning to drown in it. The Odyssey shuddered to a final, violent halt, its systems dead, a tomb of metal and fading hope. But its sacrifice had bought the opening they needed. Through the breach torn in the Nexus' fleshy hull, Kaelen led the charge, a handful of Zenthar elites at his back. They plunged into a living corridor of pulsating, veined tissue, the air thick with a psychic hum that felt like drowning in tar. This was not a ship. It was a cathedral of nightmares, a single, planet-sized mind. The core intelligence did not greet them with weapons, but with a wave of pure despair. It flooded their senses, not with lies, but with a devastating, inescapable truth. Kaelen's mind was wrenched from his body and thrown into a future that felt as real as the ground beneath his feet. He stood on Earth, but it was an Earth stripped bare. The skies were a permanent, sickly orange, the great cities reduced to skeletal ruins being slowly consumed by alien flora. He saw the overgrown, silent streets of his own childhood home, the rusted husk of a playground where no child would ever laugh again. The vision was meticulously crafted, a gift of absolute futility. This is not a possibility, a voice that was all voices whispered directly into his soul. This is an inevitability. All your struggles, all your clever tricks are just noise before the coming silence. Your species is a brief, violent flicker in the dark, and your flame is about to be snuffed out. The Zenthar around him roared, their warrior minds battling the psychic assault with pure, brute force rage, but they were faltering, their certainty cracking under the weight of a future they could not fight. Kaelen, however, did not roar. He did not fight the vision. He walked through it. He knelt in the red dust that had once been a field of green, letting the profound grief wash over him. And then he looked up, not at the ruins, but through them, his voice a quiet rebuttal in the face of absolute desolation. "You are right," he conceded, and the admission shocked the Gestalt consciousness into a moment of stillness. Humanity is a flicker, but you have made a fatal error in your calculations. You believe a flicker is weak. The Zenthar, hearing his calm tone through their own agony, began to steady themselves. Kaelen stood, and as he did, the vision of the dead earth began to change. From the cracks in the pavement, defiant green shoots emerged. From the silent ruins, he projected the echoes of every song ever sung, every story ever told around a fire. "You see the end of things," he said, his voice growing stronger, resonating with a power the hive mind could not comprehend. "But humanity has always built our monuments in the shadow of our own extinction. Our greatest art, our deepest loves, our most profound courage, these are all born from the knowledge that nothing lasts. A flicker is all we have ever been, and yet look at the light we cast." The vision of ruin shattered, not vanishing, but being overwhelmed by the blinding, brilliant, chaotic light of 10 billion human lives, each one a story refusing to be erased. The despair broke against the simple, unassailable truth of human spirit. The core intelligence recoiled, not in pain but in confusion. It had shown him the end of everything, and he had called it a beginning. "You are logic and hunger." The thought was not a whisper, but a spear of pure defiance hurled directly into the heart of the Nexus. "We are chaos and heart." Kaelen did not shield his mind from the psychic assault. He opened it. He unleashed a torrent of everything the hive mind could not catalogue. The white-hot rage of a mother protecting her child. The profound, aching sorrow for a lost home. The stubborn, illogical joy of a song sung in the rain. The messy, complicated, and beautiful storm of human emotion flooded the ordered consciousness, a data stream of pure, incomprehensible noise. The Nexus recoiled. It was not a physical movement, but a systemic one. Its perfect, unified logic, built for consumption and efficiency, had no subroutine for processing love. It could not compute the strategic value of grief. The psychic pressure holding the Zenthar warriors wavered and then shattered like glass. The fatal vulnerability was not a gap in its armor, but a fatal flaw in its very essence. It could not understand what it was fighting, and in that moment of perfect, horrifying confusion, it was no longer a predator. It was prey. The psychic scream of the dying Nexus was a silent, expanding wave of static that washed through every mind linked to the battle. In the wake of Kaelen's emotional onslaught, the core intelligence was reeling, its flawless unity fractured into a billion shards of conflicting, incomprehensible data. It was vulnerable, its defenses momentarily down, but it was not yet dead. Its self-preservation protocols were already initiating, beginning to reroute its consciousness to seal the breach. The window was closing. From the heart of the Xylos fleet, a single ship broke formation. It was the Matriarch's vessel, a magnificent, city-sized crystal that had been the heart of a people's logic and light for generations. It did not fire its weapons. It simply turned, aligning its prow with the pulsing, wounded heart of the Nexus, and initiated a full power burn. Its engines flared with a light purer and brighter than any star, a final, glorious expenditure of its entire energy reserve. There was no hesitation, no request for permission. It was an act of pure, unflinching calculus. The Matriarch understood the equation Kaelen had taught them all. One life, one ship, one culture's heart to save the whole. Her vessel became a spear of living light, ramming directly into the Nexus core. The explosion was not one of fire and shrapnel, but of overwhelming, resonant energy. The crystal ship shattered, releasing a wave of power that overloaded the Nexus regenerative systems from the inside out, scouring its consciousness into nothingness. In the final microsecond before the light consumed her, a single, clear transmission, imbued with warmth and absolute certainty, pierced the static and found Kaelen's command channel. The curve in the road, her voice echoed, serene and triumphant. It was worth it. Lead them well, human, and then only silence. The Nexus and the Matriarch were gone. Across the galaxy, the silent tide simply stopped. Harvesters drifted aimlessly, their synchronicity severed, becoming mere inert asteroids in the dark. The victory was absolute, but on the bridge of the human flagship, no one cheered. They stood in a silence heavier than any defeat, the Matriarch's final words hanging in the air, a legacy and a burden. She had not followed him out of obligation or fear. She had chosen his path, and in the end, she had proven its ultimate value with the most profound currency there is. Her sacrifice sealed the compact not in triumph but in shared, sacred loss. It was a bond no treaty could ever create, forged in the fire of a choice freely made for the sake of all. The silence after the storm was heavier than the battle itself. On the scarred bridge of the Odyssey, the main view screen showed a graveyard of gods, The silent Tide Armada, once a terrifyingly coordinated swarm, now drifted as countless dark husks, their malevolent light extinguished forever. No one spoke. The Zenthar warriors stood with their weapons lowered, their aggressive postures softened by a shared, bone-deep exhaustion. The few remaining Xylos delegates pulsed with a soft, mournful light, each flicker a tribute to their fallen matriarch. There were no cheers, no cries of victory. The cost had been too high, the sacrifice too personal for any celebration. They had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had shown them the price of survival, a bill paid in the most precious currency imaginable. Kaelen stood among them, his own human frame seeming small and fragile next to the hulking forms of his allies, yet he was the unshakable center of their quiet reverence. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had carried the weight of entire civilizations and finally, carefully, set it down. His gaze remained fixed on the silent fleet, not in triumph, but with a profound, weary respect for the enemy they had been forced to destroy. The war was over, but the work of defining the peace they had bought with so much blood was only just beginning. The air in the grand hall of the Zenthar citadel tasted of ozone and cool stone, a stark contrast to the psychic screams and plasma fires of the recent war. Here, on a world forged for conquest, the leaders of the former concordance gathered not to negotiate but to affirm. There were no thrones of judgment, only a circle of equals standing on polished obsidian. Griv, his chiton still bearing the scorch marks of battle, stepped forward. In his massive claw, he held a commander's sigil, a newly forged piece of artistry that fused the sleek lines of human design with the angular, brutalist aesthetics of Zenthar craftsmanship. He did not speak. With a slow, deliberate motion that held the weight of 1,000 battles, he pressed the cool metal onto the shoulder of Kaelen's simple uniform. The click of the magnetic lock was a soft sound, yet it echoed with the finality of an age ending and another beginning. From the assembled delegates, a Xylos representative, her light a calm, steady blue, spoke into the silence. Her voice was not a whisper, but a clear chime that resonated in every mind. We sent a human to negotiate. Now we serve the strategist. The galaxy is safer for it. The title was not one of royalty, but of function. It was an acknowledgement of the role he had already been performing, the burden he had already been carrying. Kaelen turned to face the assembly, his gaze sweeping across the Boran, the Cathar, the Zenthar, and all the others. He did not stand taller. The sigil on his shoulder did not seem to weigh him down, but rather it looked as if it had always belonged there. The Sentinel Compact was forged in fire, he began, his voice calm and carrying, but it will be maintained with wisdom. We have learned the cost of division and the price of unity. Our strength is no longer in our individual arms, but in our united will. He paused, letting his words settle over them like a bomb. This is not my victory. It is ours. You did not follow me out of fear or conquest. You chose a path of survival, and you walked it with a courage that humbles me. In that hall, a new galactic order was cemented. Humanity's voice was now central, not because they had the largest fleet or the most territory, but because they had earned a respect that was beyond dispute. Their capability was undeniable, their strategic mind the key that had unlocked a future for them all. The strategist did not rule from a throne. He served from the center, a first among equals in an alliance built not on force, but on the hard-won trust that can only be born from shared sacrifice and a victory bought with the most precious price of all. The command sigil felt cool and strangely heavy on Kaelen's shoulder, a permanent reminder of the war won and the peace now held in trust. He stood before a sprawling star chart, the once hostile systems now glowing with the steady, interconnected light of the Sentinel Compact. The silence around him was no longer that of dread, but of a hard-won calm. A soft, rhythmic clattering of plates announced a presence. He turned to find a young Zenthar officer, his carapace still gleaming with the fresh polish of a new rank, standing at a respectful distance. The warrior's multifaceted eyes studied the human, not with the old suspicion, but with a look of deep, almost unsettling contemplation. The question, when it came, was not about fleet deployments or resource allocation. Its tone was lower, more searching. What is the next lesson, strategist? Kaelen's smile was a slow, genuine thing, a human expression the galaxy was still diligently learning to interpret. He looked from the young officer's earnest face back to the star chart, to the countless points of light representing 1,000 different species now bound together. The lesson, he said, his voice soft yet carrying immense weight, is that service is not slavery. It is the highest form of trust. I serve your future. You serve our collective survival. We have spent our strength building walls against the dark. Now we learn to build gardens, and he finished, his gaze sweeping across the infinite possibilities mapped before them, are just getting started. In that quiet moment, the legacy was sealed. The humans sent to negotiate had not conquered them with weapons. He had not even convinced them with words alone. He had demonstrated a truth so fundamental that it redefined their very understanding of power. True strength was not in dominion, but in the willingness to bear the burden for others, and in the profound trust of those who would choose to follow you into the unknown. The galaxy had found its strategist, and in doing so, it had discovered its